was a terrifying experience, you know. I imagine the most shook up one was probably Steve. He was only like 17. I think he actually lied about his age to get the job out there.
Yeah, I was 17, so I was the kid. I thought we was going to go to jail for murder.
There was times I was saying we need to go back. There was times I was saying we need to go get help. You know, I mean, it went back. Everybody was going back and forth, you know, in their own minds and between each other. When we got back there and we looked around the area and we couldn't find Travis, that's when it hit Mike. Mike and Travis were best buddies then, you know, and stuff. And I think he felt really bad about taking off and leaving him like that.
We came off the mountain after we was looking for Travis and we couldn't find him. And we pulled in there. And Kenny got out and called the sheriff's department.
I think Kenny just told him it was a missing person. He didn't tell him what was up, you know.
It didn't come directly to me. It came to a deputy sheriff in Heber who called me on the phone, and then he gave me a little more detail on it about you guys coming in from the woods and something got your attention.
A few minutes after we parked out in front of the station here, Deputy Ellison arrived. Three of us volunteered right away to get in his car with him and tell him what had happened. He says that he didn't believe us or disbelieve us. You know, he was going to be neutral. But before we went up on the hill to radio, for him to radio the sheriff, we better be certain because we could get in a lot of trouble.
I did not notice or did not observe any type of thing that would indicate they've been drinking or using drugs or anything like that. There was one or two that seemed to be visibly upset, scared, whatever terminology you might want to use, and were concerned of what was going on.
Travis Walton was just 22 years old when this happened, and he was in this tiny little town of Snowflake, Arizona. This little town that was founded by Mormons. Everyone knew everyone in Snowflake. So it's not just like he's just in New York City or some other big town where he's anonymous. The question is, what the hell happened to this young man? How is it that he could just disappear?
We're a rough-looking bunch then, you know, and a bunch of us out there with chainsaws and that, and some conflicts here and there, you know. So they just immediately started assuming, well, they killed this guy, you know, because they weren't going to believe that wild story we were telling them.
The police, and no one can blame them, had to look at the much more obvious real-world possibility that these hard-working, tough blue-collar guys, even though they were friends, there was a falling out, there was a fight, an argument, and one way or another, Travis lost his life. The body was hidden.
And we went to search the next day. They split us up. They had a deputy with each group, and the whole time the deputies asked me, you know, and telling me, well, if you just tell us where the body is and what you did with Travis, we can all go home and get this over with.
I think we'd made contact with the dog handler from Arizona State Prison. He came on site and started from the point where it had been pointed out as where the incident occurred, and never picked up any scent.
And then you've got the whole search party looking for Travis. We're talking about 100 people combing through the wooded area, the forest where they had been. Nothing turns up.
I didn't go back out after that day. I wasn't going to, you know, I didn't kill him. I knew none of those guys killed him, you know, and I just wasn't going to stand there and listen to it anymore.
They took me first, and I was scared to death. I figured I was gonna flunk it no matter what. I didn't want to come here. I tried to sneak out the back door the day of the polygraph test, because all week long I've been hearing, well, they're gonna set it up to make you guys look guilty, and y'all ain't never gonna come out of that jailhouse.
We couldn't get out. You know, we weren't, it was like being under arrest, but they didn't just say we were, you know. But it wasn't no different. We weren't leaving. Nobody was going anywhere, you know, until it was completely done.
The polygraph is not a technology that's admissible in court. It's not perfect. It's, in fact, one of the most awful tests that anyone would have to take. You're strapped in with tubes around your chest, and you've got wires connected to you, and I've taken multiple polygraphs, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
I designed the questions. The entire test is established by research from Dr. Raskin out of the University of Utah, who done many, many years of research on its validity and its accuracy.
It took about 2 hours, and it was like 4 questions over and over and over.
Did you murder Travis Walton? No. Did you see what seemed to be a flying saucer? Yes. Did you see the object hit him with a beam of light? Yes.
We could have refused to take the test, you know, and we didn't have to take it, but, you know, we wanted to get the, you know, get the truth out.
And I passed it at 95%, I think, or something like that.
They all passed that test.
Most people still didn't believe it, you know. The Sheriff Gillespie definitely didn't believe it.
I think that they all were trying to tell the truth about everything.
And then what happens? Travis returns. 5 days growth of beard, lost about 10 pounds of weight, and the frenzy begins.
Okay, now could you take us back to this morning when whoever it was that first got word that he was back?
Okay, what happened was that Grant Neff, which is my brother-in-law, he got a telephone call.
Uh-huh.
He answered, Grant, he says, this is Travis. I'm back. I need help. And he says, wait a minute, fella. He says, you got the wrong number. I'm sorry. And he says, don't hang up on me, Grant. He says, this is Travis. He says, I need help bad. He asked him where he was at, and he said he was in a telephone booth out by the ENCO station in Heber.
I just looked at my mom and says, I told you we didn't kill him.
When I did hear that he had been returned, it was almost as unbelievable as the original thing. Travis was my best friend, and our whole lives have been disrupted by this. We wondered if we would ever see him again.
And it was Dwayne that picked up Travis?
Yes, which is the closest one to him anyway out of all the brothers.
Okay.
He said that when he reached in the booth to grab Travis, he said Travis started scooting away from him, trying to get away from him. He reached down, picked him up, and held him in his arms. So just like grabbing a baby, he just cuddled right up and started crying. They weighed him, he lost 12 pounds. Said he hadn't eaten in 5 days. He was in terrible shape.
I was trying to tell him what had happened, you know, just trying to get it out. And it was just too traumatic. I was just, it was all broke up. He said something about how concerned my mother had been in those days, and I didn't understand. It became apparent in the exchange there that I was thinking this was still the same night, and he said, Travis, feel your face. And I reached up and felt that I had a 5-day growth of beard, and you know, that came as really a terrible shock.
Travis Walton reappeared after several days with a bizarre story about a ride in an unidentified flying object. But it's been basically a second-hand story. Travis has been in hiding and has not met with the media. Consequently, there have been a lot of questions about the truthfulness of what Travis has had to say.
I didn't know he was back until that following night. My mom said someone came by and said Travis is back, but he's in a Tucson hospital.
I really kind of went catatonic for a little bit there. Went back, had a very emotional reunion with my mother, and it was just tears my heart to even, you know, think to this day, you know, that what she was going through.
Have you had much communication with the news media on this?
Yes, they've been in and out all the time. They're trying to corner Mom. We're trying to keep Mom away from them. We've even got some cooks in here now that's coming in and out to see the freak show, as they call it.
Everyone descends, not just your local UFO groups, UFO researchers. Sure, they were there. But on top of that, you have media. You have the National Enquirer, you know, the great tabloid rag that was covering things like this.
I felt like I had telephones growing out of my ears. I literally sometimes would be on 2 telephones at the same time, because I had phone calls from all over the world.
We did an interview at the headquarters sometime later, with the news crew there. They asked some questions regarding the test and the results and so on.
Basically, we all told them the same thing, that we're investigating and didn't have any final results.
The media scrutiny was so intense. Once it was even suspected that when my brother was involved, the reporters were knocking on the door there constantly. When we went to leave the hospital, and somebody yelled out, "There he is," and they chased us in through traffic.
Travis, why didn't you bring your story to the media?
Well, my family told me about the news people and all the people that were crowding around, and I was just in no condition to talk to anybody, especially, you know, a mob of people like that. I just couldn't handle it.
Plus the warnings that my brother had and my family had from various quarters, that it was a dangerous situation as to who might get a hold of him. Not necessarily that the sheriff's department would be involved in any sort of foul play or underhanded attempt, but what if they were to hand me over to some government agency, and to heck with what damage that might do to me, you know, if they were after information or certain things that they considered important.
Does he remember what this thing looked like? The craft? Yes, yes.
We were working on the Mogollon Rim in the Sitgreaves National Forest, which is the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. It stretches all the way from south of the Grand Canyon clear into New Mexico. There's a much of it that's relatively untouched because it was, you know, one of the last frontiers. It was gratifying because we were actually, you know, improving the forest. It was called timber stand improvement, to remove damaged and dead trees and clear out certain overgrowth to limit the fire danger and protect the forest. When we weren't working, you know, the beauty of the surroundings was just something that just has an effect that, you know, it's really just hard to describe. You have to be there to appreciate the freshness of the wilderness and being in touch with nature, the animals, the trees.
At times on your breaks and that, it was like sitting out here right now, just relaxing out in the woods, you know, where it's beautiful and that, you know. It was a great job.
It was early November. Pretty cold, but it would warm up pretty quickly once the sun came up, but not too much so that, you know, you didn't overheat getting work done.
I don't remember doing it, but Mike says that I called in sick that morning and he had to do some talking to get me to go work with him. Come pretty close to missing out on an experience like that.
We're always a little behind on the contract. You know, you just get out there and really bust your butt for a couple of days and you get caught back up. That day, you know, we're a little behind, so we worked until it was starting to get dark.
We loaded up the equipment and put it in the truck and headed out of there. And hadn't driven very far when we caught glimmers of this glow coming through the trees.
I first thought it was the moon, you know, and then as we're driving along, I'm looking over here and I could see the moon over here.
Definitely something out of the ordinary, you know, you don't normally see any light at all out in the woods at night.
I'd spent time in the, you know, I was on an aircraft carrier and that, you know, and I'd been around a lot of aircraft and that. Somebody's saying, well, maybe it's a plane crash, but I'm looking at it, you know, and it's not a plane crash.
Could be headlights shining up at an angle, maybe a campfire or lights in a tent, something, but that just wasn't kind of fitting in with the lay of the land.
It's kind of like light shining through a lampshade. Basically white, but it's kind of yellowish glow to it. I mean, that's what it appeared to me.
I urged Mike to hurry up and get up there to where the light was breaking through the trees. There seemed to be sort of an opening through the trees that was letting some of the light shine across the road ahead. And when we broke into the clearing, there it was.
You know, it was, God, it was just absolutely beautiful.
It was hovering about, I'd say 15 to 20 feet off the ground.
As soon as Mike did stop the truck, you know, I was throwing open the door and hurrying towards it, thinking it would just take off almost immediately.
Travis had the door open before we even stopped. He was there, I don't know why. I'm asking him about that. I said, what were you thinking?
I was really, you know, immediately had a greatly growing fear that I had made a foolish move. But I didn't want to betray that to the rest of the guys, and so I kept going, but, you know, at a slower rate.
As he got closer, I heard the sound, and it was like a beep.
There was a high-pitched alternating frequency that carried real well, but the closer I got, the more subtleties I could hear to the sound, parts of it that seemed to be at the edge of the range of human hearing on the high end and also in the low end, where you were actually feeling the sound rather than just hearing it with the ear.
I don't know if anybody else heard that or not, you know, and there was a low rumble like.
One of the guys said, "You feel that?"
I really panicked then.
I jumped into a crouch, which was kind of like down and forward, which brought me that much closer to the craft, so that when I stood up to run back to the truck, that's what brought my body into the closest proximity to the surface of that craft.
Turned my head the other way, and then the woods all lit up a bluish green light. And when I looked back, he's a few feet off the ground, and he's stretched out like this.
The object blasted him with some sort of a ray or bolt of light or something. He hit the ground about 10 feet or so from where he had been standing.
I mean, it wasn't like he had a muscle at all, you know, or bones. He just crumpled up right there. I thought he was dead.
I was in an instant panic. The guys behind me, somebody says, "Get the hell out of here."
And that's when Mike started the truck up and took off. We drove down the road maybe a quarter mile, half mile, you know, from the craft. And you could see vehicles, you know, every once in a while going down that road. Well, you knew it was hunters with guns. My thought at first was, let's go get some of those. A lot of us were saying to go back and that, and a lot of us, say, you know, at the same time saying, let's go get help, you know, but it was Mike's decision, so we counted on that and went with him. I think we had one flashlight, and he had the headlights of the vehicle shining up in that clearing on that slash pile. We walked around the perimeter with a flashlight, and all in a line, one right behind the other.
Once they couldn't find me, and you know, my body wasn't laying where I'd hit the ground, they just figured they needed to go and get help.
My mom wanted me to stay away from everybody because the town went crazy, and I went into hiding. And so I would just come out the back door or crawl out a window or something when nobody could see me.
The police up here said that if it's a hoax, they're going to go ahead and put all kinds of charges against him. And that's the only thing that's involved in it right now.
I see.
The only threats I got were like verbal harassment as I'm walking down the street or something, you know, somebody yell out, "Hey, you know, we know what you did," or saying we're stoned on drugs. And there was some government people, I'm sure they were government, because they used to drive them old Plymouth cars that, you know, they'd be the ugliest colored, and the rims always matched, and two guys sitting there in suits. I'd see them fall for about the first couple of weeks, just about every time I went out the door.
And they're going to run him through this polygraph too?
Right. Polygraph, ESA, and progressive hypnosis, and they said possibly sodium pentothal.
Well, they're going to give him the works then, aren't they?
Yeah.
He was scheduled to take an examination with me at our office in Phoenix at the time, and he never showed up for it, but I think it's more Dwayne's influence rather than his that he didn't show up.
Why not the polygraph test? This has been a major criticism.
A lot of people have criticized it because they think polygraph is a lie detector, because it's called that, but it's not. And Travis was under that impression too. He was anxious to take a lie detector or polygraph test. I advised him not to, and several other people advised him not to, because what it actually measures is stress. And questions about stressful memories would bring stress reactions just as well as anything else.
They didn't even have the term post-traumatic stress disorder in those days, you know. In those days they called it shell-shocked, or there was other words for it related to wartime trauma.
One of the psychiatrists said it would have been a disaster for him to take it at the time. It would have created a lot of false impressions.
This led to a lot of misunderstandings and a lot of bad feeling that the sheriff couldn't understand the fragile condition I was in. To him, you know, my top priority should be, you know, get out there and take a lie detector test. I was in such a fragile condition that my brother made all these decisions. I didn't even talk to him or discuss these things with him, tell him what I wanted, whether I would do this interview or do that or anything. I was, you know, not in that kind of shape.
He had to process all of this. And that's the hard thing to do, because even though he was gone for 5 days, he only remembered about 2 hours worth of his time. And you'd have to ask yourself, well, why didn't he remember more?
Within a few days, I underwent regressive hypnosis with Dr. James Harder at the University of California at Berkeley. He did a regression on me in which I was able to recount the memories for the first time in their entirety without so much of the fear that was just keeping me from even speaking without breaking down.
One of the things that's a pretty good earmark of authenticity, beyond any reasonable doubt, is the welling up of a strong emotional reaction during the time that a person is reliving an experience under hypnosis. The spontaneity, the emotional reaction, the quick tears and terror, when you come across that sort of thing, is sometimes awe-inspiring.
I talked to Dr. James Harder not long after he interviewed Travis and worked on that case. And Dr. Harder stressed the psychological impact that this had upon Travis. He was terrified.
When I regained consciousness, I was looking up at a light shining down on me from the ceiling. I believed that I was in the hospital. I didn't make any attempt to move because of the pain I was in. I couldn't focus my eyes very well, but I looked beyond the top edge of the thing that was laying across me, and I saw 2 men leaning over me that had kind of underdeveloped features and no hair of any kind. I didn't even think. I just lashed out, and I grabbed up a tube, a clear piece of glass or something, and I tried to break off the end to get something sharp to defend myself with, but they didn't try to approach or anything. They just left. They just ran out real fast. There was a corridor outside, and they went to the right, and I went to the left. It was a very narrow corridor, and it was dimly lit everywhere. I went into this room that you could even see the stars back through the wall I just came through. And there was nothing in the room but a chair with some controls and knobs and things. I heard somebody come in, and I turned around, and it was a man. He wasn't like the other creatures or whatever at all. He looked just like you and I, except he had a helmet on. I started babbling questions to him. I ran over there, and he wouldn't answer me. He just took me by the arm and wanted me to go with him. I thought maybe he can't hear me through the helmet. We went out to the door. It was a large room. And there was 2 other UFO-looking things. They looked like flying saucers, kind of, except they were rounded, an oval shape, and they're really shiny, like chrome. I was led down the hallway and in a room with 3 other people that were like himself. I sat in the chair, and I tried to get the people to talk to me that were there, and they didn't have things on their head, and so I thought that maybe they could hear me, but they wouldn't answer either. They put a deal over my face. It was kind of like an oxygen mask thing. It was kind of clear plastic. I looked up at the ceiling, which was just, it was all solid light. There wasn't any light fixture or anything. And that was last I remembered. I went to sleep until I woke up. I was laying on the pavement. I looked up the roadway. It was night, and I could see a light on the bottom of a flying saucer, and it just went straight up really fast, just without a sound. I recognized the roadway, and I could see a light down the hill, so I ran down that way, down to the phone booth by the gas station there. I called my brother-in-law. That's the way it happened.
What happened to Travis after we took off in that truck, I can't tell you. You know, I wasn't there. I don't know. But I believe every word Travis said about it. You know, I don't have any doubt in my mind because, like I say, he's never lied to me about nothing.
That procedure was actually quite a major step in the reduction of stress that I was feeling. I say reduction, but, you know, it was at at dangerous levels for months afterwards.
We know that it's possible to confabulate under hypnosis, but it's very important for the hypnotist to put in safeguards to prevent that from happening. And James Harder, Dr. James Harder, was very skilled at doing hypnosis.
The session was taped. It was observed by 2 psychiatrists, 3 actually, a whole team of reporters, other researchers, my brother. There was quite a few people present. You know, everything was properly conducted.
There's no reason really to believe that it did not occur the way he recalled it. He had a lot of conscious recall of what had occurred, and he just filled in some of the details.
You have listened to the description that he gave us of his ordeal. What are your comments, your reactions in comparison with past cases?
Well, I was struck by the fact that he described these beings that didn't look quite human. He described them precisely the way another person has described them who had a similar experience. Now, this case has not been published anywhere, and no case like it that I know of has been published, so it's something that Travis could not have read anywhere. And the descriptions are identical.
We have the core experience, and that is what is so important here.
Not too long after the incident happened, you know, many investigators, other than the Aero Phenomena Research Organization, most notably Dr. J. Allen Hynek, a number of other people who were very active in the field at the time who have either passed away or retired from the field. But one person really comes to mind was Stanton Friedman, a nuclear physicist who you know, takes a very scientific approach to investigation of such things. And he was making a documentary film called UFOs Are Real.
My first direct contact with Travis was in 1978. I was technical advisor, co-scriptwriter on a movie.
They wanted to know if I would be a part of it, and I agreed.
California nuclear physicist Stanton Friedman, who spent 14 years in private industry working extensively on classified government-sponsored projects such as this nuclear rocket engine and other advanced space systems. Since 1970, he is the only space scientist known to be devoting full time to UFOs.
After 21 years of study and investigation, I'm convinced that the evidence is simply overwhelming that our planet Earth is being visited by intelligently controlled vehicles whose origin is off the Earth.
My focus is on facts and data and evidence, not on sensationalism. And I haven't had a case citing myself, so I'm not talking about, look at me, look what I saw, look what I did. And I specialize in using archives and places like that. And I think that's important, that as a nuclear physicist, I demonstrate that you can be scientific when dealing with something as kind of off the wall as flying saucers or off the sky.
Stan does his homework, and he does his field work too. He came out there, visited me in my home, spoke to the people involved, investigated the site.
That's what I'm known for. I check on things, and I have what I call a big gray basket. Not black, not white, maybe. People want a yes or a no answer. Do you believe this or don't? I say, I don't know enough in many cases. If somebody tells you a story for 2 minutes and I'm supposed to make a judgment? No. That's not the way we nuclear physicists act. At least this one doesn't.
The true watchdog of truth is someone who advocates objectivity, open-minded examination. You neither accept nor reject until all the evidence has been properly evaluated. And that's all the evidence, pro and con.
No matter what your perception of something is, or your belief, or your opinion, or your speculation, if you want to do the job right, just follow where the evidence takes you. And no matter where it leads you to, no matter what kind of an outcome or result, whether you like the outcome or not, You will always stay credible if you follow the evidence.
The uniqueness of Travis's case is that there's certain aspects you don't see in many other cases. For one, there were several other people who saw him being zapped. It wasn't one man's testimony.
The one witness cases with no physical evidence are pretty easy just to kind of put aside and say, well, I can't say either way. You've got one person telling me a story. Now, when you have 7 people telling you the same story, and those 7 people are all passing on the relevant questions in not just one polygraph, but multiple polygraphs, I don't know of another case. I do not know of any other UFO type of a case that has that much empirical evidence in its favor, just solely based on the polygraph.
Back in those early 70s, there were not too many polygraph examiners in the state of Arizona. And local law enforcement, small agencies, depended upon either Phoenix Police Department or Tucson to furnish that type of expertise.
I was a police officer for a number of years, and when the Department of Public Safety was instituted in 1968, there were certain things that they were going to furnish in some scientific field, question documents and things like that, and polygraph. They tested several of us, and the outcome was that I was number 1 on the list, and then I was sent to New York to a polygraph school in New York City. And this was in the fall of 1971. And I've been doing polygraphs ever since.
Cy Gilson, whose opinion was pretty well known and respected as a polygraph examiner, we had used him on other matters, criminal matters and stuff, and always with good results.
We had a meeting of the 6 crew members and the sheriff. Travis's older brother, I think his name was Dwayne, I believe, in the chow hall at the jail. And they finally agreed that they would all submit to this exam. I did tell them briefly what it was like, what was going to be attached to their bodies and why, and gave them some kind of an idea what they were going to go through during this test.
They came in and talked to us. We got into an argument with them, you know. Some of us have been in trouble with the law before, you know, and I know me and Alan were thinking that's what's up here, you know, they're going to, you know, they're going to try to say we failed this.
I was more scared this day that we came to this courthouse than the day that I seen Travis get zapped. This was the most horrible day because I just knew that we weren't coming out of this.
There was one young man, he was the youngest of the group, sat over sort of the side and didn't have much input or anything to say. And from past experience with interrogations and so on, someone like that is more likely to admit that it's a sham or whatever. So he's the one I wanted to choose first, because if it was a sham, it would save a lot of time and effort on my part and everybody else. Steve was his first name, but I don't remember the last name.
I always thought they just took Steve because he was young and the most scared.
You know, I was the first one to take the polygraph test because they thought I would crack.
I usually can get a pretty good idea as I go through the exam to know whether or not the questions are profitable in the sense that he's responding to certain specific questions, and then I would have a conclusive examination. And frankly, when I finished with him, I was quite surprised myself because he was passing the exam.
Once the test got underway, he started changing his mind very quickly. After he had tested about 3 of the 6, he seemed to be acting differently. By the time he had tested all of us, he seemed to be a believer. I talked to him after the tests, and he indicated to me that apparently he was wrong. Unofficially, he said that he believed that we had told the truth.
One young guy, I think he was a red-haired fellow, his name was Dallas, that's his last name. And he had been in some minor scrapes or something with the law prior to that. So he was a little bit dubious about taking the exam to start with. He did not cooperate with me at all. They have to cooperate in the sense that they have to sit still, no movements, listen to the questions, one-word answer, and so on. And he was doing anything he could to disrupt the tracings, which he did, and his test was inconclusive.
5 of them passed. One of them is inconclusive merely because of the person's general nervous tension, not because there was any failure.
The one, I believe, Alan, at the beginning was inconclusive because he got all flustered, walks out of the exam, didn't finish. They had to mark that inconclusive.
But I tested each one of them down the line, and they all come out on the positive side. They were being truthful to those relevant questions.
Now those relevant questions, if you take the passing rate, which at some point, all of them had passed, you're looking at a probability of the most conservative, about 1 in a 78,000 chance that they are lying about that relevant question, got away with it.
As far as conclusive examinations of polygraph of tests, the fact that the 5 that I did test, and they all come out passing the exam in the way that they did, would probably eliminate to the most degree that there'd be one lying and get past me. That would be, I think, impossible in itself.
To obtain an expert opinion on what conclusions could be drawn from the polygraph tests in the Travis Walton case, we interviewed Edward Gelb, president of the American Polygraph Association.
Hundreds of police departments and corporations throughout the world utilize the polygraph to separate truth from deception. The 94% accuracy of the polygraph has been well documented, not only in real-life situations as we've discussed here, but in laboratory and university studies that have been conducted throughout the world. The odds against 6 people successfully deceiving a trained polygraph examiner on a single issue are over 1,000,000 to 1.
That's extremely important. There's a lot of controversy about lie detector tests. Some people state that an honest person can tell the truth and fail, a sociopath can lie and pass, but it would be extraordinarily difficult for 5 people initially to pass that test. Eventually, the 6th did take the test and pass, and Travis and his brother also passed lie detector test after lie detector test.
If that's not sufficient evidence concerning this UFO incident, what are we doing convicting people and condemning them to death on the basis of less testimony than that?
If you only had the evidence of the polygraph, you still have the most well-documented case in UFO history. We also have the tree growth in the immediate vicinity.
We went to do a documentary for a television show out at the site, and this was during the winter, heavy snows there. And so, the difficulty that we had finding the exact spot, I thought, was because of the snow. Found out later that the crew boss, who was, being interviewed on the site also, had another reason to conclude that why we were having trouble finding the exact spot. And it was because the trees nearest where the craft had come down were very much larger than he expected they should be. So the following spring, he went back and he discovered that the trees nearest where the craft had come down were growing at a phenomenal rate.
Somebody had the bright idea to do a sample. Now, these guys are loggers. These guys, worked for the Forest Service. They know trees.
Tree ring evidence is a very solid, way of documenting the growth rate of these trees. And the calculations show that these trees were producing wood fiber at 30-something times the rate they had in the previous 85 years. Other trees exhibited the same kind of changes, and the effect diminished the farther you got from that spot.
Now, this tree was probably just a tiny little sapling at the time, but the accelerated growth part, you can see here, is still solid. After the tree died, the part that was not affected by accelerated growth rots, and this other part doesn't.
It was proven that this was not due to any sort of accelerated growth due to greater access to sunlight or water because of the tree thinning that had gone on, because this phenomena was not evident in trees farther away from where the craft had been.
I would say that is what we call a significant finding. For some reason, and coincidentally, it happens to be in the same clearing where the object came down, we have trees that have grown tremendously in the following years. We don't know the physics behind it, we don't know the biology behind it, but it happened.
I think it's important for people to recognize, the weight of evidence that these things do happen.
If you go online and look for UFO reports, you will find in North America alone about 12,000 sightings a year. Now that doesn't mean they're all alien craft, obviously, but there's a lot going on every single day. Every day. And people are seeing truly inexplicable things happening.
I mean, how could you possibly believe that we're the only beings in this universe, It's not. There's no way.
We've come a long way in our understanding about the odds of life elsewhere. With, 100 billion stars in the Milky Way? Conservatively, if there was only 10 planets per star, we're talking about 1,000 billion planets. Not all of which would be, life-supporting, of course, but there's just enough believability, just enough numbers of reports to sort of nudge people in the direction of accepting that we're not alone.
The public is becoming more aware and more accepting that there is life out there in the universe, in our galaxy, in fact, and that life has traveled to our Earth.
At the same time, I'm always careful to say that not everything that's reported is of this nature. I think it is important to retain a degree of healthy skepticism.
Now, I personally have seen at least 3 different objects that I can't explain, doing very unconventional maneuvers in the sky. Does that make me a believer? Do people ask if I'm a skeptic? I don't like those terms because I think everyone should be skeptical.
We need skeptics. We need intelligent people with a skeptical attitude about this because this is a strange field.
But a debunker is someone who is out there to tear people's stories down, to ridicule people, so that the people will either just go away and take their stories with them, or will be forced into a situation where they'll admit that they made it all up, even though they didn't.
4 basic rules for UFO debunkers. And Travis has run into all of these. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up. What the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. If you can't attack the data, this is particularly true in Travis's case, attack the people. And do your research by proclamation. Investigation is too much trouble.
It's so funny because I've gone on a lot of times with some debates with some of these debunkers, and you're extraterrestrial, you say. I said, I didn't say it was extraterrestrial. I said, maybe it is. I don't know. How am I supposed to know? All I'm saying is that this is what people saw. This is what was reported. This is what the photographic evidence backs up, the radar evidence, whatever it is, but whatever particular case it is, you can speculate all you want is to figure out what it was. We know what it wasn't.
They begin with the idea that if it's unproven, that's the absolute equivalent of disproven. And, if you think about it, that's pretty absurd.
They know that UFOs aren't real. They absolutely know it is empirical fact. How cool is that?
They will reach and they will stretch and they will find anything that they think will make some kind of sense to somebody as a way of explaining. Their whole job is, we must explain this away.
Certainly one of the most successful propagandists of the second half of the 20th century was Philip Glass. And his area of propagandizing was almost anything strange, but especially UFOs.
He, through the 50s and early 60s, had never read anything on the topic of UFOs. But he had already predetermined that anyone who believed that this had happened was a crank or a kook. Those were 2 of his favorite words.
He sat in a very privileged position. He was senior avionics editor for Aviation Week and Space Technology, based in Washington, D.C. So the go-to guy for any media people who needed anything.
Klass was a man who was extremely well connected. You know, years before the Travis Walton case, Klass worked very hard to destroy the reputation of one of America's leading atmospheric physicists, a man named James McDonald, who was a fearless, brilliant, tireless UFO investigator researcher.
To kill the character of people if you couldn't attack their findings was something that Philip became very good at. I think Philip contributed directly to the suicide of Dr. James McDonald, one of the finest and most courageous scientists in the history of trying to get UFOs into the public mindset.
Klass also did the same thing with Stanton Friedman. I discovered a letter in the archives, in the Canadian National Archives, when Friedman moved to Canada back in 1979. Klass wrote a scandalously scathing, libelous letter to the Canadian National Research Council trying to destroy Friedman's reputation there.
He carried on what I would call a personal vendetta against Travis. He hadn't talked to any of the witnesses during that, or naturally not. That wasn't his style.
There were some rather underhanded tactics being employed, altering quotations to reverse the meaning of things that people said, and even misquote to make it seem that they were saying something they didn't.
I received a phone call from Philip Glass, and he told me who he was and what he was looking for and information, and he started asking me questions. I had some input with regard to Mr. Glass beforehand, so I asked him if he would just put all the questions and stuff in writing and send it to me. I'd be happy to answer his questions, but I never did receive any letters from him.
Philip Glass was extremely thorough in digging. I mean, he called former employers, everything, but he connected with anything. And here, I am the main person involved. Never attempted to even phone me. Never attempted to write a letter or anything.
So there is no concern with truth or with people's reputations or anything like that. That's the way he was, and I say that I've met with him. We've even had some meals together where we agreed not to talk about UFOs, frankly, but most of the time.
What the crew did was get together and sign a joint letter challenging Philip Glass to a new polygraph test that the crew would take. And it would have to be an examiner that was mutually agreed upon, so that that in the aftermath, when we passed, which we would, there could be no criticism that the evidence was tainted in any way. Now, he would have to pay for the test if we passed. We would pay for them if we flunked. So he's got nothing to lose by accepting. He wound up basically not really accepting it because he couldn't back it up.
Phil's approach was very straightforward. You start with the assumption there can't be anything to flying saucers. So every case has a prosaic explanation, he claimed.
He initially stated that Travis Walton must have been out in a cabin in the woods, and that when his brother took him to Phoenix for medical exams, the puncture wound on the backside of his elbow must have been an indication that Travis was injecting LSD.
He knows that Travis didn't have the experience, therefore it must have been something else. And one of his pet theories was Travis and the other men who he was working with had a contract to log a certain amount of lumber over the course of a year.
He settled in on the idea that Mike Rogers was in deep trouble with his contract, and he had to invent this story in order to get out of it.
And so they came up with this perfectly rational story of Travis being hit by a beam of light from a UFO, and that's the excuse that they gave for trying to get out of the contract. As a good friend of mine once said to me, maybe they should have come up with an idea that somebody's grandfather died.
It was a hounding that went so far as to urge a federal criminal investigator to come and try to force Mike to sign a confession. And Mike got written affidavits from the contracting officers in the Forest Service stating clearly that there's absolutely no way that Mike could have benefited and actually was harmed in many ways by this incident having happened.
You know, just like Phil Klass when he offered me the $10,000. That was a lot of money back in the 70s.
Steve Pierce, who was the youngest member of the work crew that Travis Walton was on, stated that Philip Klass offered him $10,000 in order to say that this was a hoax.
$10,000 is a nice amount of money today. In 1980, that was a really nice chunk of money. And particularly if you're a young guy like Steve Pierce was at the time, who was struggling financially, could have used the money.
He flew, we discovered later, to Texas, tracked Steve down, even though he was operating under his middle name, Jeff, and took him out to dinner and expended a tremendous amount of time and effort and money to try to persuade him to take the $10,000 bribe.
Why would any normal citizen go through jumping through such hoops to get someone to debunk this case? Another thing to consider with Klass are the people that he consorted with. Now, one of these was a man named Donald Menzel. Before there was Klass, Menzel was America's leading debunker of UFOs. Menzel was an astronomer at Harvard University. Doesn't get any better than that.
A highly respected academic who wrote a number of books under the pose of, a skeptical academic looking at UFOs as misinterpretations of natural phenomena and things.
But there was a secret life to Donald Menzel also that nobody, or very few people, knew about. Donald Menzel was very well connected to the NSA.
I had to get permission from 3 different people to look at Menzel's papers at Harvard, and discovered to my total shock that he wrote Jack Kennedy, President Kennedy, whom we knew because Kennedy had been on the board of overseers at Harvard, and his area of interest was astronomy, is one area where he may be able to provide special assistance, and that has to do with the very special National Security Agency. And he tells Kennedy, when we are properly cleared to each other, I can tell you more. Which was one of those, what?
Back in the 60s and 70s, the NSA was very much below the radar of this nation. Menzel's wife didn't even know that he was well connected with the NSA. That's how secret this was. But Menzel and Klass had a very close correspondence.
Back in the 70s, it suddenly turns out that the CIA is playing footsie with a lot of journalists. They would report to the CIA after attendance at a foreign conference on a regular basis. Big names for major publications. And it was a big scandal at the time. And my feeling is that Phil was the perfect person to be used by the CIA. He wasn't married. He traveled a great deal to conferences. He had a legitimate job for a major publication, very well thought of, Aviation Week. And he could attend conferences and report back what Americans were saying they shouldn't have been saying, what Russians were saying that we'd like to know what they were saying.
Klass was able to get op-ed pieces in the New York Times like no big deal. He was able to get on major media to talk about these cases. No big deal for him. Well, gee, when you think about how difficult that is to do, you've got to be very well connected to do all of those things.
And now that through the Freedom of Information Act, I have come into possession of the FBI investigation of this guy, there's definite evidence that he probably was acting on behalf of some covert agency in attempting to discredit this.
Whether or not Klass was employed by a federal agency to debunk UFOs and abductions is sort of up in the air as far as I'm concerned. His FBI file states that the FBI suspected he was not in full possession of his faculties, and they should be most circumspect in working with him or discussing this with him.
I have a copy of a memo, or several memos, a number of documents from the FBI, and one of those is a memo from J. Edgar Hoover to the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, basically turning the investigation of Philip Klass over to them, saying, we're holding this in RUC status. In other words, it's an open case, and here you have it. Now, this is a standard CIA recruiting tactic, to have some prosecutable offense that you can hold over somebody's head and get their cooperation.
Would the CIA then hire someone that the FBI considered to be not in full possession of his faculties? Or did the FBI write that in order to be deceptive? You know, we don't know the answer to that question.
I don't believe that anyone turned him into a UFO skeptic, but they certainly were in a position to guide and they're also finance his efforts.
Here's our slush fund, here's $10,000, and you're going to destroy this case for us. This is a classic mark of an intelligence community operation.
Klass stated in letters that he did not have a very high income. So the money came from somewhere. I don't know if it was a federal agency, if it was a private individual, or what it was, but he was highly motivated.
Now let's go a step further. Why would the intelligence community want to debunk the Travis Walton case?
It sounds like science fiction, but you know, you have to acknowledge it would be extremely disruptive for this kind of, you know, total, undeniable truth to be just delivered to the world tomorrow.
People say to me, why doesn't the president or why doesn't our government admit that UFOs are from someplace else? Because they can't. Because nobody in the government is willing to come out and say, yes, we're being visited, and we're sorry that we lied to you about it and kept it from you for so many decades, but we felt that we were doing it for your benefit, to protect you, to protect the citizens until we knew more about it.
Disinformation was a very important thing in winning World War II. It was aimed at Hitler and Japan, but we lied intentionally, often, powerfully. That's the way the ball game is played.
So what you find is that you have gatekeepers within the world of the media, you have gatekeepers in the world of academia who, their job, it's like sheepdogs guarding the flock.
And that's also one of the reasons why I don't think that there will be disclosure in my lifetime.
But so many people think, oh no, it wouldn't be that harmful, you know. Everybody they know would think this is great, you know, full disclosure. But no, if you look around at the institutions, the financial, religious, social mores that are out there, it would be extremely destructive. I mean, people would not go to work tomorrow. The structure of energy, finance, the whole thing would be turned on its head.
And that's really how this system works. Now, there are a few brave people who are able to go beyond that. But if you're going to go beyond that, you've got to be brave and you've got to be prepared to fight. You've got to be prepared to have people like Philip J. Klass go after you if you become too good at it.
I have it for an emergency so the family can get, and so I didn't want to leave it on in case they want to come.
I hated Travis for a long time after this because my whole world just tore up, and people thought we were lying and thought we were crazy, and why are you sticking up with Travis for all this time? You know this really didn't happen.
It changed my life in a way. I'm kind of sorry about it. You know, I had to leave here, you know. I wasn't going to, I can't stand there and have somebody call me a liar.
People were desperate to explain it away. And some of it was just very simply fear-based. You know, people in the community wanted reassurance this can't happen, can it?
It's a really strong religious community. And this just kind of messed up their whole program, you know what I mean? Their way of thinking about it.
My mom still don't believe it. She thinks this is all from the devil.
And you think about how significant it is in our society. The most important thing that ever happens to you that really freaks you out and you don't know how to process it, and now you're not able to talk about it with anyone because you know that they're going to laugh at you, they're going to look at you like you're crazy, alien abduction, what's wrong with you?
This fear of ridicule encourages people not to report their cases. I check my audiences. I say, how many people here believe they've seen what I would describe as a flying saucer? And the hands go up at first like this, you know. And I point and count, 1, 2, 3, 4. By the time I get over there, the hands go up vigorously. 10% of the people in my audiences believe they've seen one. That's a lot. Most of them think they're the only ones there, you know. But then I ask, how many of you reported what you saw? 90% of the hands go down. So that's what we're dealing with. We don't get access to data because people are fearful of ridicule because even though they're believers, they think somebody else, everybody else isn't.
I've got a younger brother that is really smart, and he works for a college in New York, and he doesn't understand why they pick people like us instead of people like him. You know what I mean? Why would they come to somebody that's a redneck? I don't want to say that word on camera.
Redneck?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can say redneck.
A redneck instead of us educated people.
There is some fear, and I think fear is a basis of this, but solely when people don't understand something, it's a natural human tendency to mock. Songs were written about Travis, various forms of ridicule, and I think that if he would tell you was almost, or if not harder, than everything that happened in those few short days that he was gone.
From a psychological perspective, I can't imagine what it would have been like for a young 22-year-old man working out with a logging crew in the woods to have undergone this radically life-changing event.
It's a net negative, you know. We lost our jobs in the immediate aftermath of it, and I'm, you know, definitely got the feeling that, you know, many opportunities that I had in life were forever closed to me on account of having had this happen.
He decides to stay in Snowflake. Everyone knows who he is, what happened to him, and from then on he's labeled and identified in everything that he does, every job that he goes and gets, every friend and association. So you can imagine his whole self-identity is now related to this abduction.
There were times over the years where I thought, you know, if I could just get this off my back any way I could, not just clam up, but just tell them, oh yeah, we were all drunk that day, you know. Even though it's a lame and silly thing to say and it wouldn't fit with any of the facts, the people who were so anxious to hear something like that would latch onto it and leave us alone. But I never did it.
He was somebody I looked up to because he had the courage to speak about this, and my sense hearing him speak was that Travis was not comfortable. He was not having a good time. He felt a sense of responsibility that he had to do this because it was important and because it was true.
I give him an A+ rating, if you will, for integrity, for intelligence, for aplomb, being able to handle himself under fire. How he could put up with some of the debunkers, I don't know, because they're nasty. I'm not sure I would be able to.
I admire him and Mike for all the time. I mean, I got away from it, you know. I moved to a place where nobody knew me. And Mike and Travis, you know, they stood there and just kept telling the truth, you know what I mean? And stood up there, you know, like all of us should have done, I guess. He's just one of those people.
Travis became kind of the poster child for people who have had similar experiences. It allowed them to see somebody who's overcome the most intense ridicule and focus that you can in the public eye, and to come out and stand back up and say, look, I did question everything that I kind of knew about, you know, who I was and how I fit into the universe, but I put it back together and I'm okay with it.
And now Steve's doing quite a bit, I guess.
What changed my feelings?
Yeah, because you said you hated Travis for a while after this happened.
We're on tape here, dude. My wife and my kids, they told me, you know, you got to forgive Travis what happened. You can't blame him for all this, and they believe that, you know, it's time to heal. you know, I have a story to tell, and people should be, you know, should know about it. But if you don't come out and tell your story, somebody else is going to tell it for you.
For me to see Travis continue to go out and to speak, to reach out to people when he could just kind of brush it aside and say, I don't want to be that guy anymore. I don't want to be known as the guy who was abducted. I just want to forget about it. But instead, he's embraced it. And that speaks very highly of him, because if not to serve him, I think it's helped a lot of other people.
He certainly rose to the occasion. He certainly rose to the occasion and has seemed to meet it every single step along the way. And that, for me, is a mark of fine, extraordinary character, decency, and everything that most good people should be aspiring to and living a decent, contributing life.
There's a degree of responsibility to try to make something good come of it, you know. Certainly I have to accept the bad. So if I can direct what's happened in a way that I can make something good happen in the world, I'm looking for it. This was the road we took on our way to work every day. We'd all meet at like Mike's house. Sometimes he'd go around and pick everybody up. We'd worked on the contract a great deal, and much of it had already been cut, but much of the allotted time had already elapsed. So we were under pressure on a deadline, and we'd extended our working hours to try to get it all done before the snow came. A lot of this drive looks the way it looked back then, but then there's other parts that have been changed by the Rodeo Chetasky fire, which burned up over 500,000 acres of forest. At that time, it was the biggest recorded fire in Arizona history. We spent so many back-breaking hours improving this forest, and then to have all that work just go up in smoke because of just one little careless moment, you know, 100 miles from here. Turkey Springs contract is pretty much everything on our left, all the way over to that far ridge that's all burned off. And I think there's one more past that was the ridge where we were at that day. Keep an eye out for the wild horses. They like this area. Okay, turn right here on the left. We won't be able to drive all the way up to the site because it's all been closed. Okay. But we can walk there now. I'm struggling to come to terms with this, and especially to try to understand or take some meaning, at least personal meaning. You know, after 4 decades, I've come to, you know, a little different take than I had initially. I took it extreme exception to what had happened, you know, the fear, the horror of it all. It was only gradually did I just come to realize that they didn't just bring me aboard to do experiments on me or just torment me to see, you know, what pain does to humans or something of that nature. That most likely you can infer that with that amount of energy hitting me, it would have been probably fatal, and that they probably took me aboard in order to revive me, to correct the damage. I don't blame you for doing.
I don't blame Mike for taking off either, because he had all of us others to worry about, too, you know. Yeah. You know, and if he would have went to my mom's house that night and said that I was zapped by a UFO, my mom would have shot him off the porch.
Yeah. I think they understood that I was getting too close in a way that was putting myself in great danger. They were trying to move the craft a little bit out of range before I got myself hurt, and it was too late. The energy had hit me and damage was done, possibly cardiac arrest or worse. And so these beings were in a position to where they could leave a body there, or they had the responsibility, being a part of this accident, to do their best to try to bring me aboard and revive me.
My big theory about what it was all about, that it was a intentional display of the mythology of the Phoenix. The death part of the display was, you know, him getting knocked to the ground like that and making some of the crew members didn't think he might be dead. Of course, so many other people during the 5 days he was gone thought that he was dead. Figurative rebirth is when They dropped him off right outside of Heber here.
I tried to convince myself that Travis actually was killed, but they picked him up to fix him up, you know. So it had a happy ending to it, you know what I mean? They didn't just pick him up to mess with him, they picked him up to help him.
I'm actually, you know, fortunate, if that was the case, that they did so, because the nearest hospital was over an hour away, and none of the crew knew CPR or anything like that.
When you hit the ground, I mean, you went funk, you know, and yeah, you went, you bounced, and then you hit the ground.
When I finally came to rest, was I face up or face down?
You was like this.
Dead man, huh?
Yeah. We saw something go across the sky.
Yeah.
You know, so we thought it was gone.
Yeah, so
we were more worried about coming back and seeing you lying there dead.
Charcoal. Huh?
Yes, there'd be nothing left of you, and that was our biggest fear. That
you see the process of this person who was once a very young man, who's now more mature and has had time to reflect on this over his life, and he's still. You really get the sense that he is still trying to process this. What happened to me? Will I ever get closure on it?
I really believe that it was done on purpose, and you know, someday we're going to find out why. First time I came out here to camp, it was restricted. Nobody was, you know, soon after the fire, nobody was supposed to be here. But
did you feel any fear at night?
No.
Not even about bears or anything like that?
No, I was actually in the back of my truck in the camper.
Oh, pretty safe.
wasn't camping out on the ground. But
did you like stay up late at night?
No, actually I was drinking a little bit when I was here. I guess that helped me through it. Huh?
Oh, I didn't know you'd ever be a drinker. That must have been a phase you were going through, huh?
Yeah.
Some of the crew have intimated that they kind of wished it had happened to them. I think, you know, some of it's based on, you know, a kind of a wistful desire to have the kind of insight that I've gained from having this experience. Some of it maybe even connected with, you know, the attention that came my way. I'd certainly be happier without it. I've responded, you know, guys, you know, you would not want this to happen to you. I wouldn't wish it off on anybody other than some UFO skeptics. They would be served well by having it happen to them.
When you did come, did it refresh your memory? Did it like bring the feeling that we had back then?
Yeah, it's kind of an invigorating type of thing. It's times of emotion, you know, you get a little bit of the bad memories of it, parts of it, but it's just a special spot for me. I mean, what an experience.
You know, the skeptics who say, why, if they're really coming here, don't they just land on the White House lawn? Well, they're not going with open contact, and they're not going with total cloaking. So what's going on? I think a conditioning process.
I get email after email, people saying, give me the GPS coordinates. I'm not giving that to nobody except been there.
Here a big concern was, you know, fire, them starting a fire and burning the place down. It just happened naturally.
Well, that was one concern. I was concerned that people would cut up the trees for souvenirs, and then there'd be nothing to do research on. Or even people doing something to try to, you know, cast doubt on things.
We're being gradually conditioned in a way that's the least destructive possible. So I think, you know, in a way, by talking about this, I'm playing a part in that, that people need to come to that realization in a way that they can handle.
When you look at the Travis Walton case, it really is a situation of the more you look, the more you find. It's been 40 years now. You've got a very credible subject in Travis Walton. You've got 6 credible witnesses. You have a situation where the debunkers have tried to throw this out and they've failed every single time. It's stood the test of time.
And it was just right at the top of the rise. Cut him in the saddle of these 2 hills coming down. Yeah, it's got to be right in here someplace. Definitely the spot, Travis.
Yeah.
Ken, how does it feel 38 years later, the first time you and Travis are back?
Yeah, I think he deserves a hug on this day. 38 years, we had that tremendous experience.
It's just, you know, the other day I was talking about this and I said 28 years and everybody hastened to remind me, no, it was 38 years. And you know, it's just incredible to think that that much time has gone by.
Yeah.
I tell people, in spite of the fact that I've come to terms with it better and realized that it wasn't as malevolent as I at first thought it was, that even now, I'd rather it never happened, you know?
Travis, what would you like for your future? What would you like to have come of this?
Just acceptance of myself in the future. I have had a lot of offers of people trying to turn it into some kind of a profitable thing, but I have no interest in any of those kind of offers. I just want the truth to be known. I have intentions to cooperate with research, with reputable men that are, you know, genuinely scientifically interested.
Do you wish it had never happened to you?
Well, hindsight, I don't know. What happened happened.
The areas that were not giving off light were a dark metallic area, but the surface of this disc was unbroken. It was like glass. You know, one of the crew members compared it to a brand new car in terms of the complexity and the power and you know, the actual, you know, mechanical beauty of it. I could see the reflection of the surrounding trees in the surface of this craft. The glowing areas were not extremely bright. You know, it wasn't hard to look into. It wasn't like blinding light. So, you know, it was a subtle enough light that you could actually see things reflected in the glowing and the non-glowing areas of the craft. I couldn't see all that clearly. It was blurry and double vision. And I could hear the sounds of movement around me, and I just took this to be doctors, that things were being taken care of. I was on some sort of a raised table, a gurney operating table or something. And then when I looked in the direction of the movement sounds, you know, I could see blurry forms that I thought were doctors wearing surgical caps and masks, you know, with just an area across where the eyes would be that would be uncovered by that. But when I sharpened the focus in my eyes, I could see that was not the case. that I was looking into the face of this creature. And then I knew I was not in the hospital, and I was in very great danger. I felt that, you know, this was extremely life-threatening.
It was a terrifying experience, you know. I imagine the most shook up one was probably Steve. He was only like 17. I think he actually lied about his age to get the job out there.
Yeah, I was 17, so I was the kid. I thought we was going to go to jail for murder.
There was times I was saying we need to go back. There was times I was saying we need to go get help. You know, I mean, it went back. Everybody was going back and forth, you know, in their own minds and between each other. When we got back there and we looked around the area and we couldn't find Travis, that's when it hit Mike. Mike and Travis were best buddies then, you know, and stuff. And I think he felt really bad about taking off and leaving him like that.
We came off the mountain after we was looking for Travis and we couldn't find him. And we pulled in there and Kenny got out and called the sheriff's department.
I think Kenny just told him it was a missing person. He didn't tell him what was up, you know.
It didn't come directly to me. It came to a deputy sheriff in Heber who called me on the phone, and then he gave me a little more detail on it about you guys coming in from the woods and something got your attention.
A few minutes after we parked out in front of the station here, Deputy Ellison arrived. Three of us volunteered right away to get in his car with him and tell him what had happened. He says that he didn't believe us or disbelieve us. You know, he was going to be neutral. But before we went up on the hill to radio, for him to radio the sheriff, we better be certain, because we could get in a lot of trouble.
I did not notice or did not observe any type of thing that would indicate they've been drinking or using drugs or anything like that. There was one or two that seemed to be visibly upset, scared, whatever terminology you might want to use, and were concerned of what was going on.
Travis Walton was just 22 years old when this happened, and he was in this tiny little town of Snowflake, Arizona. This little town that was founded by Mormons. Everyone knew everyone in Snowflake. So it's not just like he's just in New York City or some other big town where he's anonymous. The question is, what the hell happened to this young man? How is it that he could just disappear?
We're a rough-looking bunch then, you know, and a bunch of us out there with chainsaws and that, and some conflicts here and there, you know. So they just immediately started assuming, well, they killed this guy, you know, because they weren't going to believe that wild story we were telling them.
The police, and no one can blame them, had to look at the much more obvious real-world possibility that these hard-working, tough blue-collar guys, even though they were friends, there was a falling out, there was a fight, an argument, and one way or another, Travis lost his life. The body was hidden.
And we went to search the next day. They split us up. They had a deputy with each group, and the whole time the deputies asked me, you know, and telling me, well, if you just tell us where the body is and what you did with Travis, we can all go home and get this over with.
I think we'd made contact with the dog handler from Arizona State Prison. He came on site and started from the point where it had been pointed out as where the incident occurred, and never picked up any scent.
And then you've got the whole search party looking for Travis. We're talking about 100 people combing through the wooded area, the forest where they had been. Nothing turns up.
I didn't go back out after that day. I wasn't going to, you know, I didn't kill him. I knew none of those guys killed him, you know, and I just wasn't going to stand there and listen to it anymore.
They took me first, and I was scared to death. I figured I was gonna flunk it no matter what. I didn't want to come here. I tried to sneak out the back door the day of the polygraph test, because all week long I've been hearing, well, they're gonna set it up to make you guys look guilty.
Pounds. Said he hadn't eaten in 5 days. He was in terrible shape.
I was trying to tell him what had happened, you know, just trying to get it out. And it was such a, it was just too traumatic. I was just, it was all broke up. He said something about how concerned my mother had been in those days, and I didn't understand. It became apparent in the exchange there that I was thinking this was still the same night, and he said, "Travis, feel your face." And I reached up and felt that I had a 5-day growth of beard, and you know, that came as really a terrible shock.
Travis Walton reappeared after several days with a bizarre story about a ride in an unidentified flying object. But it's been basically a second-hand story. Travis has been in hiding and has not met with the media. Consequently, there have been a lot of questions about the truthfulness of what Travis has had to say.
I didn't know he was back until that following night. My mom said someone came by and said Travis is back, but he's in a Tucson hospital.
I really kind of went catatonic for a little bit there. Went back, had a very emotional reunion with my mother, and it was just tears my heart to even, you know, think to this day, you know, that what she was going through.
Have you had much communication with the news media on this?
Yes, they've been in and out all the time. They're trying to corner Mom. We're trying to keep Mom away from them. We've even got some coops in here now that's coming in and out to see the freak show, as they call it.
Everyone dissents, not just your local UFO groups, UFO researchers. Sure, they were there. But on top of that, you have media. You have the National Enquirer, you know, the great tabloid rag that was covering things like this.
I felt like I had telephones growing out of my ears. I literally sometimes would be on 2 telephones at the same time, because I had phone calls from all over the world.
We did an interview at the headquarters sometime later with the news crew there, and they asked some questions regarding the test and the results and so on.
Basically, we all told them the same thing, that we're investigating and didn't have any final results.
The media scrutiny was so intense. Once it was even suspected that when my brother was involved, the reporters were knocking on the door there constantly. When we went to leave the hospital, and somebody yelled out, "There he is," and they chased us in through traffic.
Travis, why didn't you bring your story to the media?
Well, my family told me about the news people and all the people that were crowding.
And y'all ain't never going to come out of that jailhouse.
We couldn't get out. You know, we weren't, it was like being under arrest, but they didn't just say we were, you know. But it wasn't no different. We weren't leaving. Nobody was going anywhere, you know, until it was completely done.
The polygraph is not a technology that's admissible in court. It's not perfect. It's, in fact, one of the most awful tests that anyone would have to take. You're strapped in with tubes around your chest, and you've got wires connected to you, and I've taken multiple polygraphs, and I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
I designed the questions. The entire test is established by research from Dr. Raskin at the University of Utah, who done many, many years of research on its validity and its accuracy.
It took about 2 hours, and it was like 4 questions over and over and over.
Did you murder Travis Walton? No. Did you see what seemed to be a flying saucer? Yes. Did you see the object hit him with a beam of light? Yes.
We could have refused to take the test, you know, we didn't have to take it, but, you know, we wanted to get the, you know, get the truth out.
And I passed it at 95%, I think, or something like that.
They all passed that test.
Most people still didn't believe it, you know. And the Sheriff Gillespie definitely didn't believe it.
I think that they all were trying to tell the truth about everything.
And then what happens? Travis returns. 5 days growth of beard, lost about 10 pounds of weight, and the frenzy begins.
Okay, now could you take us back to this morning when whoever it was that first got word that he was back?
Okay, what happened was that Grant Neff, which is my brother-in-law, he got a telephone call.
Uh-huh.
He answered, Grant, he said, "This is Travis. I'm back. I need help." And he says, "Wait a minute, fella." He says, "You got the wrong number. I'm sorry." And he says, "Don't hang up on me, Grant." He says, "This is Travis." He says, "I need help bad." He asked him where he was at, and he said he was in a telephone booth out by the ENCO station in Heber.
I just looked at my mom and says, "I told you we didn't kill him."
When I did hear that he had been returned, it was almost as unbelievable as the original thing. Travis was my best friend, and our whole lives have been disrupted by this. We wondered if we would ever see him again.
And it was Dwayne that picked up Travis?
Yes, which is the closest one to him anyway out of all the brothers.
Okay.
He said that when he reached in the booth to grab Travis, he said Travis started scooting away from him, trying to get away from him. He reached down, picked him up, and held him in his arms. So just like grabbing a baby, he just cuddled right up and started crying. They weighed him, he lost 12.
Well, and I was just in no condition to talk to anybody, especially, you know, a mob of people like that. I just couldn't handle it.
Plus the warnings that my brother had and my family had from various quarters, that it was a dangerous situation as to who might get a hold of him. Not necessarily that the sheriff's department would be involved in any sort of foul play or underhanded attempt, but what if they were to hand me over to some government agency, and to heck with what damage that might do to me, you know, if they were after information or certain things that they considered important.
Does he remember what this thing looked like? The craft? Yes, yes.
We were working on the Mogollon Rim in the Sitgreaves National Forest, which is the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world. It stretches all the way from south of the Grand Canyon clear into New Mexico. There's a much of it that's relatively untouched because it was, you know, one of the last frontiers It was gratifying because we were actually, you know, improving the forest. And it was called timber stand improvement, to remove damaged and dead trees and clear out certain overgrowth to limit the fire danger and protect the forest. When we weren't working, you know, the beauty of the surroundings was just something that just has an effect that, you know, it's really just hard to describe. You have to be there to appreciate the freshness of the wilderness and being in touch with nature, the animals, the trees.
At times on your breaks and that, it was like sitting out here right now, just relaxing out in the woods, you know, where it's beautiful and that, you know. It was a great job.
It was early November. Pretty cold, but it would warm up pretty quickly once the sun came up, but not too much so that, you know, you didn't overheat getting work done.
I don't remember doing it, but Mike says that I called in sick that morning and he had to do some talking to get me to go work with him. Come pretty close to missing out on an experience like that.
We're always a little behind on the contract. You know, you just get out there and really bust your butt for a couple of days and you get caught back up. That day, you know, we're a little behind, so we worked until it was starting to get dark.
We loaded up the equipment and put it in the truck and headed out of there. And hadn't driven very far when we caught glimmers of this glow coming through the trees.
I first thought it was the moon, you know, and then as we're driving along, I'm looking over here and I could see the moon over here.
Definitely something out of the ordinary, you know, you don't normally see any light at all out in the woods at night.
I'd spent time in the, you know, I was on an aircraft